to follow the Noble Baroness Lady Eaton, I rather agree with the points that she's just made, but the Noble Baroness Lady Sugg also knows that I have considerable admiration for her, especially over issues around the stand she took about cuts to our overseas aid programmes, and we have the privilege of serving together on the Select Committee of Your Lordship's House that deals with international relations and defence. I find myself in disagreement with her. She won't be surprised by that, and I would urge Your Lordships to really think seriously about Amendment 183. I'll give the House, if I may, two reasons for this. One is procedural, and the other one is more substantive. And I suppose on the substantive point, I will cite, as the Noble Baroness Lady Eaton has done, some of the contradictory evidence that we have before us. Now, Your Lordships may not be able to work out whether you believe one side of the argument or the other, and that brings me straight to the point about procedure. Here we are at almost midnight. My Lords, this has never been debated, this issue, at any stage in another place in the elected House. And rather like Amendment 170 that we discussed earlier on, we've got to consider how we resolve sensitive and controversial ethical issues of this kind. And at this kind of time, in a bill that didn't have any consideration of this question in the elected House, coming to us not considered at committee stage even of this bill, but at this fag end at report stage, surely all of us can agree, wherever we come from on the more substantive point, that this isn't the way to go about parliamentary business. My Lords, I would also argue that on an issue of this kind, and bear in mind that since 1967, when the original legislation was passed in another place and then approved here, there have been 10 million abortions. That's around 200,000 every single year. Put another way, my Lords, there is one abortion every 3 minutes. Now, you don't have to come from the position that I think Noble Lords will be aware that I come from in believing in the sanctity of every human life to think that this cannot be right. Indeed, my good friend, who was the mover of the original legislation, Lord Steele, has often said he never intended it to be as widespread or as repeated as abortion has often become, all of which points to the question of procedure. Should there not be a joint committee of both houses to consider this extraordinarily complex ethical question? Shouldn't we at least have a select committee that considers these matters? Shouldn't there be pre-legislative scrutiny before a bill or an amendment of this kind comes before Parliament? It's passing strange, my Lords, that since 1967, no select committee of either House has looked at this legislation, the original 1967 Abortion Act. And I would say to the Noble Baroness Lady Fox, who always, I think, makes valuable contributions to Your Lordship's House, we are changing the law. That's why this amendment is actually before Your Lordship's House this evening. Otherwise, we wouldn't need the amendment if we weren't changing the law. And I would also say to those who have emphasised rightly the importance of conscience, that I think some of my friends, and noble friends, on the Lib Dem benches, particularly, I would say, why is this not a conscience vote? Why is there a whip on something of this kind? Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I was actually sent a copy earlier on saying that there would be a whip and people should vote content for this amendment. So, if that is so, then I'm glad to hear it. But the Noble Lords will know that for me this was an issue that actually led to my leaving the Liberal Democrats when it became a party policy. So I'd love to hear clarity on that question as the evening goes by, because I passionately believe this should be a conscience question for every member, but also at every vote, that this should never be a party policy. People should be free to make up their own minds on a serious ethical issue, one of such magnitude and order that it shouldn't be dealt with in such, I think, a perfunctory manner. It was the Noble Lord, the Minister, Lord Camel, who said it was always intended that this should be a temporary measure. In February, in announcing its end, the government gave the results of a public consultation. 70% of those who responded said it should end immediately. The consultation highlighted increasing safeguarding risks and, quote, concerns about coercion. And reinforcing that point, BBC Newsbeat last weekend reported that 15% of women in a Savanta Comres survey said that they'd experienced pressure to terminate a pregnancy. Some women reported being given substances to cause an abortion without their consent. My Lords, I'll be very happy to share with the Noble Baroness Lady Sugg some of the contradictory evidence from GPs and doctors. She cited the RCOG and others. But I would just point out that, again, in that Comres poll, 86% of GPs surveyed across the UK were concerned about women having a medical abortion past the legal limit of 10 weeks gestation. Concern was highest amongst female doctors, 91%. 6 in 7 GPs were concerned that the policy could see more women being coerced into abortion. 86% were concerned that women were at risk of being coerced into an abortion by a family member or partner. 87% were concerned that women were at risk of unwanted abortion arising from domestic abuse by partners controlling or monitoring their actions. 94% agreed that staff at abortion providers need to ensure that they are collecting correct medical and personal information to certify a woman for a home abortion, and that it's important that checks are put in place to ensure women being certified for abortion meet legal criteria. So, my Lords, there is contradictory evidence, and surely that should be properly evaluated before we proceed in further liberalising our abortion laws. The study released in November 2021 suggested that more than 10,000 women had to receive hospital treatment following the use of medical abortion pills in England between April 2020 and September 2021. And previous polling showed 92% of women in Britain agreed that a woman receiving an abortion should always be seen by a qualified doctor. And there are many statements from women that I could provide again to the Noble Baroness, should she wish to see them. My Lords, the hour is late, so to conclude, an email from a regional chief midwife described how women had to attend emergency departments for a range of incidents, including, I quote, significant pain and bleeding related to the process through to ruptured ectopics, to major resuscitation for major hemorrhage, and incidents involving the delivery of an infant who was up to, as the Noble Baroness Lady Eaton told us, almost 30 weeks gestation. My Lords, the evidence suggests that official statistics appear to significantly underestimate the complication risks. And the Minister will have seen that 600 medical practitioners have signed a letter highlighting concerns and calling for the cessation of the temporary measure. This is worthy of proper scrutiny and proper consideration. It involves the safety of women, but it also involves, my Lords, the taking of a new life. Science teaches us that life begins at conception. Surely, my Lords, we should give this proper and due consideration before passing this into law.